A single mother saved a millionaire buried alive in the woods. But what he whispered left them both. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night was darker than usual, the kind of heavy blackness that swallowed even the moonlight. Wind pushed through the trees, carrying the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves. Sarah Miller clutched a small bundle of sticks against her chest, her boots sinking into the soft ground as she searched for more firewood. Her old cabin sat on the edge of the woods, and every stick mattered. Propane was too expensive, and she could not afford to waste a single dollar. Sarah was a single mother, 32 years old, with a boy of 8 waiting at home. Ethan had been tucked into bed with a thin blanket, whispering that he was not cold. She knew better. She had promised him she would keep the fire going tonight. That promise was what pulled her into the forest even when the wind cut through her coat. Then she heard it. A muffled sound, not an animal, not the groan of a tree bending in the wind. A voice, human, weak, barely pushing through the dirt and the storm. Help! Somebody help! Sarah froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. She turned her head, listening again. The sound came from deeper in the woods, off the trail. Against every instinct that screamed danger, she moved toward it, branches scratching at her arms, the ground slick with mud. A few steps later, her lantern beam caught something impossible. A man's hand, trembling, fingers clawing up from the soil. His arm was buried to the shoulder, his chest and legs hidden under a mound of wet earth. His face, streaked with mud, barely visible, gasped for air. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, dropping the bundle of sticks. She knelt down, brushing dirt away with shaking hands. "Hold on. I am here. I am going to get you out." The man's eyes flickered open, glazed with exhaustion. His lips parted, and a hoarse sound escaped. "Nathan, they tried to bury me alive." His voice cracked before he coughed hard, choking on the damp air. Sarah did not understand, but she did not need to. She clawed at the soil with frantic determination, her fingernails breaking, mud caking her palms. Every scoop felt useless against the weight of the earth, but slowly, inch by inch, his chest was freed. She grabbed a fallen branch, using it as a lever, shoving away clumps of dirt. "Stay with me," she urged. "Do not close your eyes. Breathe. You have to breathe." Her breath turned white in the freezing night air, sweat mixing with the rain on her brow. The man's breathing rasped louder, each inhale sharp like glass cutting through his lungs. His clothes were shredded, his wrists bruised raw as if he had been tied. At last, she managed to pull his shoulders free. With a grunt, she hooked her arms under his and dragged him out. The dead weight of his body collapsing onto the ground. He groaned, a sound caught between agony and relief. Sarah tore the wool scarf from her own neck, wrapping it around him. "You are safe now. You are not going to die out here." But his eyes opened one more time, catching hers with startling intensity. His lips trembled as he whispered, "If they find me again, it will not be just me. You have to be careful." Then his head fell back against the ground, and his body went limp. Sarah pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the weak rise and fall. He was alive, barely. And whoever he was, whatever danger had put him in a shallow grave in the woods, she had just stepped straight into it. The storm did not let up that night. By the time Sarah dragged the stranger back to her cabin, her arms shook from exhaustion, her nails torn, mud streaked across her face. She had wrapped him in her wool scarf and spread the thinnest quilt she owned over his body. Ethan stirred awake when she stumbled inside, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mom, who is that?" Sarah forced calm into her voice. "Someone who needed help." "Go back to bed, sweetheart." The boy's wide eyes lingered on the unconscious man on their floor, before he obeyed, curling under the blanket in the corner of their single bedroom. Sarah knelt by the man, listening for his breath, shallow but steady. Relief washed through her, but only for a moment. She had no money for a doctor, not even enough for gas to town, All she had was determination and the little she could offer. Her cabin was nothing more than 2 rooms stitched together with old timber. The roof leaked when the rain came heavy, and the furnace had gone out 2 winters ago. They lived off firewood, second-hand clothes, and the few groceries she managed to buy with her paycheck from the corner store. Sarah worked the register 6 days a week, sometimes 7, for just enough to cover rent and a sack of potatoes. Every month the landlord's letters came, stamped with threats. Late fees stacked like bricks on her shoulders. The electricity had been shut off twice in the past year. If not for her stubbornness, she and Ethan would already be on the street. She remembered last December, when Ethan wanted a Christmas tree. She had strung together pine branches and paper stars instead. He had smiled anyway, telling her it was the best tree in the world. That memory burned now, both sweet and bitter. She had sworn never to let him feel abandoned. And yet, tonight she had brought a stranger into their fragile world. Sarah lit the oil lamp, its glow trembling across the walls. She sat back on her heels, her chest tight as she studied the man she had dug from the earth. His jaw was strong beneath the grime, his wrists marked with deep welts, his suit shredded like it had been dragged across gravel. She wondered who he was, why anyone would bury him alive, and what danger might follow. She reached for the chipped basin by the stove, filled it with warm water, and began wiping mud from his face. His skin was pale, his pulse weak. He looked nothing like the drunks she had seen stumble out of bars, nothing like the workers she sometimes helped when they came into the store short on cash. This man carried something else, a weight that did not belong in her world. Sarah paused, glancing at Ethan asleep in the next room. Her son's steady breathing reminded her why she fought every day. For him, she swallowed her fear. For him, she endured the hunger when food ran out, the humiliation when she begged for an extra shift. And for him, she had risked everything tonight, because she could not walk past a cry for help. The man stirred faintly, his lips parting. She leaned closer, expecting another plea, but only a broken whisper escaped. "Nathan," before his head rolled to the side. Sarah frowned. Nathan. The name meant nothing to her, yet the way he said it carried venom and fear. Whoever Nathan was, he had nearly succeeded in burying this man alive. She rinsed the cloth again and pressed it to the man's forehead. "Whoever you are," she murmured, "you are not dying here. Not in front of my son. Not under my roof." Outside, the rain hammered against the thin walls. Sarah knew tomorrow she would have to face questions, her boss demanding why she missed work, her landlord sniffing around for rent, her son asking who this stranger was. But tonight, none of that mattered. All that mattered was keeping him alive until morning. And as the storm howled through the forest, Sarah sat awake by the dying fire, one hand on the stranger's chest to feel each fragile rise and fall, her eyes heavy with fatigue, but her will unbroken. She did not know that saving him would unravel every certainty in her life, or that the name he had whispered in the dark would soon pull her into a battle far larger than her quiet struggles. By dawn, the storm had quieted to a steady drizzle. Gray light filtered through the cracks of the cabin's shutters, spilling across the stranger's still form on the floor. Sarah's eyes burned from staying awake, but she had not let herself sleep. She had kept vigil, listening to his uneven breaths, counting each one as proof he had not slipped away. Ethan padded into the room, rubbing his eyes with the back of his small hand. "Mom, is he still here?" Sarah nodded, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Yes, he is alive. That is what matters." "Oh?" The boy crouched beside her, studying the man's face. "He looks like people in the magazines at the store, not like us." Sarah almost smiled at her son's bluntness. The truth was hard to ignore. Even caked in dirt, the cut of his ruined suit and the expensive watch still clinging to his wrist set him apart. He did not belong to their world of patched jackets and discount groceries. She tried to slip the watch off to clean his arm, but it clung tight, the strap bent but unbroken. The brand name on the dial glinted faintly in the lamplight. She did not recognize it, but she knew it meant wealth. Wealth far beyond anything she and Ethan had ever touched. "Finish your breakfast," she told her son, handing him the last of the oatmeal she had stretched with water. "We will figure this out." As Ethan ate quietly, Sarah dampened a cloth again and continued cleaning the stranger's wounds. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Mud still clung in streaks along his jaw and neck, but under it his skin was pale and smooth, not hardened like the men who labored in town. He carried himself differently, even unconscious. When she shifted his arm to check for bruises, his fingers twitched. Sarah stilled, her heart leaping. Slowly, his eyelids fluttered open. For a moment, he looked disoriented, eyes darting to the cracked beams of the ceiling, then to the flickering fire, then finally to her. His lips parted, his voice hoarse as sandpaper. "Where am I?" "You are safe," Sarah said firmly. "You were in the woods. Someone tried to bury you alive. I pulled you out." His gaze fixed on her, confusion sharpening into something else, caution, maybe fear. "Why? Why would you help me?" Sarah's throat tightened. She thought of the night before, her hands clawing through mud while the storm beat down. She thought of Ethan asleep in the next room, trusting her without question. "Because no one deserves to die like that," she answered simply. He closed his eyes again, breath hitching. "Nathan," he whispered, the same name as before. Sarah leaned closer. "Who is Nathan? Is he the one who did this?" But his strength failed. His head tilted, and he slipped back into unconsciousness. Sarah sat back, frustration burning in her chest. She was left with nothing but a name and more questions than answers. Ethan's small voice broke the silence. "Mom, if he is rich, does that mean trouble is going to find us?" Sarah turned to him, her expression softening. "It does not matter what he has. What matters is that we do the right thing." She tucked the quilt tighter around the stranger's body and glanced at the scarf still looped over his chest. It was her mother's scarf, the last thing she had left from the woman who raised her. Now it bound her to this man, a symbol she had given without hesitation. Planting her elbows on her knees, Sarah pressed her hands to her face. She did not know what future she had just invited into her home, but she knew one truth. She could not turn away now. The rain eased, leaving only the sound of drops slipping from the eaves. Morning light grew stronger, throwing a pale glow across the cabin's wooden floor. The man lay silent, a mystery wrapped in scars and secrets. Sarah exhaled slowly, her mind already bracing for what was to come. She had lived her whole life at the bottom, fighting for every scrap, but something told her that saving him had pulled her into a storm far greater than the one outside. By mid-morning, the drizzle had faded, leaving the forest outside heavy with mist. Sarah moved about the cabin quietly, tidying the space while her mind wrestled with unanswered questions. She had lived her entire life balancing on the edge of survival, and now there was a stranger in her home who carried danger like a shadow. She glanced toward the cot she had dragged out for him. His chest still rose and fell, shallow but steady. His lips had color again, faint but better than the gray of the night before. She had wrapped his wrists with strips of cloth torn from her own work apron, covering the angry welts that looked far too precise to be accidental. Ethan, restless as any 8-year-old, whispered loudly from the corner, "Mom, when is he going to wake up again?" Sarah crouched beside her son. "He needs rest. Healing takes time." "But what if the bad man comes?" "The one he said, Nathan." Ethan's eyes were wide, his voice trembling slightly. Sarah pulled him close, smoothing his hair with a tired hand. "Then I will protect you. That is my promise. Do you trust me?" The boy nodded, his face pressed against her shoulder. His trust was a weight heavier than any burden, yet it gave her strength too. Hours passed in a fragile rhythm. Sarah stoked the fire with the last of the dry logs, boiled water for weak tea, and kept watch. Every so often, she caught herself studying the man's face. Even unconscious, there was something commanding in his features, the lines of someone accustomed to giving orders, not taking them. His ruined clothes, the branded watch, the way he had whispered that name with such venom, it all added to a puzzle she could not yet piece together. Near noon he stirred again. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim cabin light. For a moment he looked lost, as if unsure of where he was. Then, his gaze landed on her. "You again," he rasped, his voice rough but steadier than before. Sarah set the cup of tea aside and moved closer. "Yes. You are safe here. My name is Sarah. This is my son, Ethan." The man's eyes shifted briefly to the boy, then back to her. "Why would you help me?" The question stung, though she kept her voice calm. Because you needed it. That is reason enough. His lips twitched as if he wanted to argue, but exhaustion pinned him down. I owe you my life, he murmured. Sarah shook her head. You do not owe me anything. Just focus on staying alive. He closed his eyes, but his hand moved slightly, reaching toward his chest. His fingers brushed the scarf she had wrapped around him. He clutched it faintly, his brow furrowing. It is not yours, he whispered, almost accusing, then softer. But it means something. Sarah hesitated, caught off guard. It was my mother's. She passed years ago. I use it to keep warm. Something unreadable flickered across his face before he slipped back into silence. Ethan leaned closer, whispering to Sarah. He is strange, Mom, but I like him. Sarah exhaled, torn between fear and compassion. Strange was an understatement. Nothing about this situation made sense. Yet she could not deny the instinct that had driven her into the storm last night. Something bound them now, fragile and unspoken, carried in a scarf and a whisper. As dusk neared, Sarah stepped outside to gather wood. The air smelled of wet soil and pine. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up fallen branches. She remembered the way his eyes had locked on hers, not like a beggar pleading, but like a man who was used to being obeyed. Back inside, she found him awake again, watching the flames in the hearth. His voice was low but steady when he spoke. Sarah, I cannot stay here. If they find me, they will not spare you. Her heart pounded at his words. Then tell me who they are. Tell me why someone buried you in the woods. He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw the steel beneath his exhaustion. Because I am not who you think I am. The fire popped, scattering sparks. Ethan stirred in his sleep, and Sarah's stomach twisted. Whatever truth this man carried, it was about to change everything. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Sarah sat rigid on the wooden stool, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The stranger's words echoed inside her chest. I am not who you think I am. Her voice came out steady, though her heart thudded. Then tell me who you are. The man leaned back against the cot, his breathing shallow but his eyes clear now. My name is Jack Harrison. He paused, as if weighing the danger of saying more. I am the head of Harrison Tech. Ben. The name struck her like a blow. Even in her small town, headlines about that company had slipped across newspapers and local television. She remembered seeing them at the corner store, stories about expansions, billion-dollar valuations, photographs of a tall man shaking hands with governors and senators. She had never paid attention long enough to care. That world belonged to someone else, not to a woman who clipped coupons and prayed her rent would not rise again. Sarah shook her head slowly. That is not possible. Men like that do not end up buried in the woods. His lips curved in a grim, humorless smile. And yet here I am. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire and the steady patter of rain easing outside. Sarah searched his face for signs of deceit, but the weariness in his eyes did not look invented. His body bore the truth. The welts on his wrists, the bruises across his ribs, the dirt that had nearly suffocated him. She whispered, Then who is Nathan? His gaze hardened. My half-brother. He has wanted control of the company for years. Last week I uncovered proof he had been siphoning money, making deals with dangerous men. When I confronted him, he decided the simplest solution was to erase me. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had expected mystery, maybe crime, but not something that reached into the glittering world of billionaires. Her small cabin suddenly felt like a fragile shield against forces far larger than her life. Jack coughed, his strength faltering. If they believe I am dead, they will stop searching. But if word gets out that I survived, they will come here, and they will not hesitate to hurt anyone in their way. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, asleep in the corner with his small hand curled around a stuffed toy. The thought of danger brushing against him filled her with fire. She turned back to Jack, voice sharp. Then you should not have told me anything. His expression softened. You saved me. I will not let you pay the price for that. Sarah stood, pacing across the narrow room. Her entire life had been built on caution, on surviving each day without drawing attention. Now this man had dropped a storm into her world. She wanted to throw him out, to deny his story, to pretend the night in the woods had never happened. But she could not. She had seen his face when he whispered that name, had felt the desperation in his voice. When she stopped, her hand rested on the scarf wrapped around his chest. Her mother's scarf. She met his eyes. If you are telling the truth, then hiding will not be enough. You need to fight back. Oh. Jack studied her, as if surprised by her resolve. Slowly he nodded. And I cannot do it alone. The words settled between them like a pact neither had intended to make. Sarah felt the weight of it, heavier than the rent notices, heavier than the hunger she sometimes ignored. She had stepped into something vast, something dangerous, but turning back was no longer possible. Outside, the mist thickened, shrouding the woods in silence. Inside the cabin, two worlds, hers built on survival, his built on power, collided in the flickering light, bound together by a single night and a whispered name. The next morning broke, with a gray sky stretched over the valley. Sarah stirred a pot of thin porridge on the stove, while Ethan sat at the small table, his legs swinging, eyes darting toward the stranger resting on the cot. Jack Harrison, if that was truly his name, had slept fitfully, waking often in a sweat, muttering fragments about betrayal and signatures. When he finally pushed himself upright, Sarah turned from the stove. His face was pale, but his eyes held a determination that had not been there the night before. "You should be lying down," she said firmly. Jack shook his head. "Every minute I spend here, Nathan moves further ahead. He thinks I am dead. That gives us a small advantage, but it will not last." The word "us" caught Sarah off guard. She had not agreed to any alliance. She was a mother struggling to keep the roof over her son's head, not someone who could step into corporate wars or family betrayals. Yet when she looked at Ethan, who listened with wide-eyed fascination, she knew the choice had already been made the moment she pulled Jack out of the ground. "Tell me exactly what you need," she said. Jack leaned forward, wincing from the pull on his bruised ribs. "I need proof. Documents that show what Nathan has done. They are locked in my office downtown. I had a copy with me, but he must have destroyed it before." His voice faltered at the memory. Sarah crossed her arms, steadying her nerves. "So you want me to march into a skyscraper and steal from your company?" Jack gave a faint smile, the first flicker of warmth she had seen in him. "Not steal, retrieve, everything that belongs to me. But I cannot ask you to risk yourself." "Oh, you already did," she replied sharply. "When you collapsed in my woods, you dragged my son and me into this." His expression sobered. "Then I will get you out. Once I am strong enough, I will leave, and you will never hear from me again." Sarah's stomach knotted at the thought. She should have welcomed it. Her life had been hard enough without powerful enemies circling. And yet, something in her resisted the idea of him walking out of her door forever. She placed the porridge in front of Ethan, then set another bowl on the cot. "Eat. You need your strength before you talk about leaving." Jack accepted it with a nod, his hands trembling slightly as he held the spoon. For a moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the clink of metal on ceramic. After breakfast, Sarah stepped outside to gather water from the barrel. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of pine. When she returned, Jack was watching Ethan draw on a scrap of paper with a stub of pencil. The boy proudly held it up, a sketch of a cabin with 3 stick figures standing outside. "That is you," Ethan explained, pointing to the tallest figure. "Mom, me, and the man we saved." Jack's eyes softened, and he reached out to ruffle the boy's hair. It was a small gesture, almost fatherly, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. For all his wealth, for all the power he spoke of, here he was, sitting in her worn cabin, eating her thin porridge, looking more human than any headline could have shown. But then the softness in his expression hardened again. He set the drawing down carefully. "I cannot stay hidden. If I vanish, Nathan wins. And men like him do not just take companies. They destroy anyone who stands in their way." Sarah met his gaze. "Then you had better make sure you are not standing alone." The fire cracked in the hearth, throwing light across the room. For the first time, Jack looked at her, not as the woman who saved his life, but as someone who might stand beside him in the fight ahead. That night the forest lay quiet, but inside the cabin Sarah could not rest. She sat by the window, watching mist curl between the trees while the fire burned low. Every word Jack had spoken replayed in her mind: documents, betrayal, danger. He was asking her to believe that the man who had nearly died in her arms was not only alive, but still fighting for an empire she could not imagine. Behind her, Jack shifted on the cot. His voice broke the silence, low but steady. "You are afraid. I can see it in your eyes." Sarah turned, meeting his gaze. "Of course I am afraid. You speak of enemies and power as if they are storms that cannot be stopped. But storms do not care about single mothers or little boys trying to sleep." Jack studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You are stronger than you realize. Most people would have walked past that grave in the woods. You did not." Her hands tightened on the windowsill. "I did what anyone with a conscience would do." "No," Jack replied quietly. "You did what only someone with courage would do. That is why I trust you." The words unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She turned back to the window, unwilling to let him see the heat rising in her cheeks. The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken tension. At last, Sarah lay down on her thin mattress beside Ethan, who slept peacefully. His small hand curled around her arm. She listened to his steady breathing and told herself she would not let Jack's war endanger her son. But just before dawn, pounding on the cabin door shattered the silence. Sarah bolted upright, heart racing. Jack was already struggling to his feet, his eyes sharp with alarm. "Who would come here at this hour?" Sarah whispered. Jack's face darkened. "It is too soon. They should not know I am alive." Another blow rattled the door. Ethan woke, frightened, and clutched Sarah's sleeve. She gathered him close, her mind racing. "Stay back," Jack said, his voice hoarse but commanding. He reached for the broken branch Sarah had left by the hearth, gripping it like a weapon. The door shuddered again. Whoever was outside was not leaving. Sarah's breath caught as she realized the truth. Nathan's reach had found them faster than she feared. In that moment, her world of quiet survival collided violently with Jack's world of power and betrayal, and there would be no turning back. The pounding at the door grew louder, each strike rattling the fragile hinges. Sarah's arms tightened around Ethan, as fear surged through her chest. Jack, pale and weak but resolute, motioned for her to stay back. "Who is it?" Sarah called, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound firm. Silence. Then a man's voice, smooth and cold. "We are looking for someone. Open the door, and no one will get hurt." Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew instantly this was no lost traveler. Jack's jaw tightened as recognition flickered across his face. He whispered, "Nathan's men." The branch in his hands looked pitiful against the threat outside, but he held it with grim determination. Sarah's heart raced. She had no weapons, no neighbors within shouting distance, no phone to call for help. Her entire world shrank to the tiny cabin, the frightened boy in her arms, and the man she had pulled from the earth. The door shook again. Jack stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in his body. "Tell Nathan he will not win. Not this time." A harsh laugh rang out. "So you are alive after all." Before Sarah could react, Jack threw the bolt and yanked the door open with sudden force. Two men stood outside, both dressed in dark coats, eyes sharp. For a moment they froze, startled to see him standing there. That pause was all he needed. Jack swung the branch hard, striking the nearest man across the shoulder. Chaos erupted. The second man lunged forward, grabbing Jack by the collar. Sarah shoved Ethan behind her and snatched the kettle from the stove, flinging scalding water into the intruder's face. He screamed, stumbling back into the night. Jack grappled with the first man, both staggering against the doorframe. His body was weak, but desperation fueled him. With a final shove, he sent the man sprawling into the mud. "Go!" Jack barked, slamming the door shut. He dropped the branch, leaning against the wall, his breath ragged. Sarah pushed the bolt back in place, her hands trembling. Ethan clung to her side, his small body shaking with sobs. For a long moment, the only sound was their breathing and the hiss of the dying fire. Then Jack turned, his eyes fierce despite the exhaustion in his body. "They know I survived. There will be more coming. Staying hidden is no longer an option." Sarah swallowed hard. She had lived her life avoiding risk, keeping her head down. Now danger had forced its way through her door. And in that moment, She understood. The only path left was forward. Jack straightened, pain etched across his face, but his voice steady. "Sarah, if we want to survive, we have to fight back." Oh. Days later, the city skyline rose before Sarah like a wall of glass and steel. She had never set foot in a place like this, where every lobby gleamed with marble and every suit cost more than her yearly rent. Yet she walked beside Jack, his arms still weak but his posture unbroken, and she carried herself with the same quiet resolve that had carried her through years of hardship. Ethan held her hand, wide-eyed, sensing the gravity of the moment. They entered Harrison Tech under the cover of dawn. Security had already been alerted by Jack's most loyal allies, men and women who had waited in silence, doubting Nathan but powerless to act without proof. Now Jack carried that proof file Sarah had helped retrieve, records of Nathan's crimes hidden away, enough to bring down an empire built on greed. Inside the boardroom, Nathan sat at the head of the table, arrogance etched into every line of his face. His surprise flickered only briefly when Jack walked in alive. "Brother," he sneered. "I thought the earth had swallowed you." Jack dropped the folder onto the polished table. Pages fanned out, contracts, bank records, undeniable evidence. His voice cut through the silence. "It almost did. But truth has a way of clawing its way back." The room buzzed with murmurs. Lawyers flipped through documents. Directors leaned forward in shock. Nathan's smirk faltered. Sarah stood at the back, her heart pounding. She did not belong here among glass walls and expensive suits, yet she felt no shame. She had seen Jack broken, buried, clawing for breath. She had seen him fight his way back not with power, but with sheer will. Within the hour, Nathan was escorted out, his empire crumbling around him. Jack's name was cleared, his place as head of the company restored. But when he turned to Sarah, his eyes held no triumph, only gratitude. Later, in a quiet garden atop the building, Jack stood with her beneath the fading light. Ethan played nearby, chasing butterflies between the hedges. Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside lay a ring, simple yet shining. "I was buried alive," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you brought me back, not just to breathe, but to live. Sarah, I do not want a life of glass towers if it does not have you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, the weight of every struggle, every lonely night, pressing into this single moment. She nodded, unable to speak. Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. Ethan ran up laughing. "Does this mean he is staying with us forever?" Sarah kissed her son's hair, whispering, "Yes, sweetheart, forever." "No." And so, the story that began in a storm, with mud and fear and whispered names, ended with light, with justice, and with love, strong enough to bridge two worlds.